Freedom Flotilla, or Asطول الحرية, is a game based off the May 2010 Israeli raid on a group of humanitarian aid ships attempting to break the blockade of the Gaza Strip. Published by the Arab Game Developers Network in August 2010, this game for old-school mobile phones was created in less than a month. Since the 2007 takeover by Hamas of the Gaza Strip, Israel has maintained a naval blockade of the territory, citing security concerns. Israel prevented supplies from entering the Gaza Strip as a means to apply pressure on the Hamas government. The Gaza Flotilla, called the Freedom Flotilla by its supporters, was a collection of aid ships organized by the Free Gaza movement and the Turkish aid group, the Humanitarian Relief Foundation. The venture was launched to draw international attention to the blockade and deliver humanitarian materials to Gaza. The ships carried a wide range of supplies, from food and wheelchairs to medical equipment, electricity generators, and cement. On May 30th, 2010, a flotilla of 6 ships carrying several hundred passengers and roughly 10,000 tons of humanitarian aid left Cyprus for Gaza. After refusing to redirect to the Israeli port city of Ashdod for inspection, the flotilla was boarded at 4:30 a.m. on May 31st by the Israeli Defense Forces. The boarding took place in international waters, roughly 70 miles from the blockade line. A clash occurred aboard the lead flotilla ship, the Mavi Marmara, between IDF soldiers and activists wielding slingshots, knives, and metal rods. 9 activists were killed, and a group of both civilians and Israeli soldiers were injured in the fray. A UN panel was unable to determine which side initiated the use of lethal force. After the raid, the ships and the activists were detained in Israel until their release on June 6th. The cargo was ultimately delivered to Gaza by Israel. A UN inquiry panel on the raid concluded that both Israel and the flotilla activists could have taken more precautions to avoid violent confrontation. While Israel's blockade of the Gaza Strip was found to be a legitimate security measure, the panel stated that the decision to board the vessels with such substantial force at a great distance from the blockade zone, and with no final warning immediately prior to the boarding, was excessive and unreasonable. As for the activists, the report concluded that the majority of flotilla participants had no violent intentions, but there exist serious questions on the conduct, true nature, and objectives of the flotilla's organizers. Freedom Flotilla gameplay consists of the player attempting to ward off Israeli soldiers, smoke bombs, and explosives. The player controls a water cannon that pushes these objects away, carefully managing a depleting water gauge that refills when the player is not firing. The objective is to make it through 6 increasingly difficult rounds of gameplay. The game is over when the ship has broken the Israeli blockade and the player views a victory screen proclaiming, "No matter how tough and conceited justice arises, truth is higher. Victory for truth and freedom, victory for humanity." If defeated, the player sees the image of a coffin draped in a Turkish and Palestinian flag. The words say, "If you haven't won victory, you have at least won martyrdom." From the menu, the player can select to read the creator's narrative of the event, which is roughly translated here. Gaza Strip, 2006 and until now, Al Jazeera 2010 and various other news agencies. A full Israeli blockade prevented the import of medicine, nursing equipment, construction materials, electricity, food, and even children's games. A relentless war targeted the infrastructure of the Strip, in which the Israeli army brutally killed unarmed civilians, women and children, and employed internationally banned weapons. Israel exercised atrocities against the people of the Strip, robbing them of their land and throwing their children in Israeli prisons and denying the most basic rights to life. International and Arab government collusion, choking and increasing the suffering, preventing Palestinians in Gaza from receiving aid and treatment from neighboring countries, ignoring the cries of their people to save their brothers from the clutches of the siege. Israeli stifling of voices and freedoms calling for prosecuting the Israeli government for their continuous violations of the international rights and Israeli criminalization of anyone offering to help the people of the Strip. Hope and challenge. Despite the tightening of the noose around Gaza, honorable individuals and people of conscience in the world decided to break the Israeli siege on Gaza and save their brothers in humanity from the injustice surrounding them, sacrificing everything they own for the cause, even their very lives. Hope and challenge. In 2010, Turkish institutions led a heroic attempt to defy the international silence and Israeli arrogance by breaching the blockade with unrivaled courage. gathering the efforts and aids of various nationalities in a fleet of ships carrying hundreds of activists, 10,000 tons of humanitarian aids, and millions of hopes from humans across the world to rescue their brothers from the tragedy of the 21st century. Readiness and determination. In May 2010, the Freedom Flotilla went to load at the ports of Cyprus in preparation for the high humanitarian mission, thus completing all international security procedures and declaring its peaceful intent to deliver the aids to the Gaza Strip. The saga continues. Source: Al Jazeera 2010, and interviews with organizers of the Freedom Flotilla. The flotilla moves across the sea towards its final destination, and amidst international waters and 130 miles off the Gaza Strip, the chapters of a new story in the epic siege of Gaza starts. As the fleet is surprised by jamming of all communication devices, but this was only the beginning. 4 naval battleships, over 10 gunboats, and a helicopter squadron rained a hail of bullets onto the decks of the boats, inflicting tens of injured and martyrs. The ships were barraged with stun grenades and tear gas bombs. Soldiers landed on the deck to control the crew and prevent them from treating the injured, and even humiliated them physically. Finally, the fleet was taken to the port of Ashdod and detained there, preventing aid from reaching the Gaza Strip in history's greatest act of international piracy. The defense for freedom and humanity. In this game, you will stand with the crew of the Freedom Flotilla to defend with your courage and existence the lives of your colleagues by the only means available at the time, throwing water through a hose to push the dangers away off the ship's deck in 6 stages through which the ferocity of enemies increasingly grows. Will you have the courage to defend those who put their names next to the thousands of martyrs of Gaza? Defend with the Freedom Flotilla for Gaza and for humanity. Interestingly, the use of water cannons by the activists aboard the vessels, which is the primary mechanic of the game, is a contested fact. While some journalists claim to have witnessed the flotilla using water cannons to repel Israeli borders, most accounts of the event discuss the water cannon vessels as an Israeli tool to attempt to stop the activist boats with non-lethal force. Freedom Flotilla was developed by the Arab Game Developers Network, which is a portal and forum for game development for Arab speakers. According to the developers, the idea for the game grew from a desire from the community to, quote, express their condemnation for the brutal Israeli actions towards the flotilla crew and hold a stance for the support of the victims. Freedom Flotilla was a collaborative project with volunteers from the forums working in guidance from 2 leaders, Homam and Wessam Bahnasi. The game was conceived on July 11, 2010, roughly a month after the events of the flotilla raid. The designers, realizing that the relevance of the game depended greatly on the time frame of its release, worked closely to ensure that development would be completed in less than a month. Although produced in 2010, when smartphones were beginning to become popular in the West, Freedom Flotilla was designed for old-school mobile phones, most of which are able to play programs designed in Java. The decision was made for 2 reasons. In the words of Homam and Wessam Bahnasi, because of the subject of the game, we preferred to avoiding publishing on controlled markets such as Apple Store or Play Store to avoid the risk of Apple or Google rejecting the game, which would have been a disappointing ending for the members of AGDN. Flash was a good alternative. However, in that case, the project would have needed more time for the graphics to look good on large screens, which wasn't acceptable given the time frame of execution. At that time, the majority of people in the Middle East had Java-enabled phones, so the decision to target that platform made sense at the time. Distribution was also easy. Just copy a file to your phone and bingo. The game launched for free on August 1st, 2010. Since that time, it has downloaded more than 25,000 times. Freedom Flotilla is a fascinating game in that it was designed as a form of political expression, not by a company, but by a community of developers loosely connected by an internet forum. While simple in design, the game addresses a controversial event that deserves deep examination. Freedom Flotilla represents one amongst a series of contested narratives surrounding the raid of the Gaza Flotilla. While third-party examination fails to support some narratives of the game, it reflects an interpretation of events broadly held by the Free Gaza movement supporters around the world.